Hello, everybody. I am here to do a mini lecture with you about RAPIS, Chapter 8, Motivation and Emotion. I am not going to be doing the entire PowerPoint. It is 50 some odd slides long. I just want to do some highlights for you. That does not mean that you don't need to know everything in the chapter. You absolutely do, but these are some things that I want to touch on a little more closely. All right, here we go. Okay, so here are the learning outcomes. You will recognize them from looking at the homepage from this week. They are verbatim, what you've already seen. These are the learning outcomes, not for necessarily only what I'm going to be talking about today, but also just for the chapter in general. Okay, so this is slide 7. By the way, you can see down here what the slide number is, so you can follow along if you like. All right, so what I want to talk to you about on this slide specifically is drive reduction theory. So on the surface, it seems to make a whole lot of logical sense. You know, we engage in behaviors that reduce tension. So, you know, if we are uncomfortable in some way, we're going to behave in a way to make ourselves more uncomfortable. You know, if you're hungry, you're gonna go find food. You know, if you are reaching for something and it's causing you pain in your back, you're gonna shift your body, right? So the thing that I want to talk to you specifically about this is that it can absolutely go into overdrive. And what ends up happening then is that you have compulsions. So drive reduction theory basically says, you know, we do something and we feel better for having done it because we were looking to relieve the stress, the tension of something that was already happening. The issue in compulsions is that you feel like you have to do something to relieve some of the pressure, but that once you do it, it doesn't actually really relieve the pressure either at all, or in the instance of obsessive compulsive disorder, very often what happens is that you don't feel the relief of the pressure until you've done something a specific number of times or a specific way or something like that. So that's just sort of like an overdrive concept of drive reduction theory. Okay, that's what I wanted to talk about on this slide. Okay, so this is slide 10. And we are talking here about Maslow and Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There's no way to go through a general psychology class and not talk about the hierarchy of needs. It's a concept that is not without issues, but it's a useful way to think about the world when you live in a westernized society. And I'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. But basically, and you can read all about this in your book, people are motivated by a desire for personal growth, and that the concept is that humans have a unique capacity for self-actualization. So what is that? So according to Maslow, the physiological needs are, you know, things like food and water and using the bathroom and staying warm and getting some sleep. Like, if you can't get these needs met, there is just no way that you can build on top of them. So, you know, this has to occur before you can move on to the next step. And then the next step is safety needs. So protection from the environment, housing, clothing, crime. This includes kind of being in relationships that are violent, for example. You're not going to get very far. If you're in a violent relationship, you're not going to be able to build all this other stuff. So love and belongingness, intimate relationships, esteem needs, achievement, confidence, that sort of thing. And then self-actualization, which is what everybody thinks about when they think about Maslow, fulfillment of unique potentials. So you are literally on top of the pyramid. You have sorted out your physiological needs. You're safe. You're loved. You have achieved, and then you're kind of psychologically free to develop yourself in creative ways, in ways that fulfill you as a human being and your desires, that sort of thing. Um, this is, if you think about it in its most basic terms, hobbies. So an argument can be made that we can also talk about self-actualization as professional achievement and stuff, but an argument can also be made that falls into esteem needs, whatever. But if you think about your own self-actualization, often the best way to think about this, I feel, is how far have you taken your hobby? If you are somebody who is a mountain climber, is that like something you're really good at and a lot of things about, and you just all your friends are mountain climbers and everything is very intense for you around that. You can't have a hobby on that level that intensely if you are having trouble somewhere down here. So what is the issue with this? There's a lot of issues with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. First of all, not all societies value, love and belongingness, or, maybe they value achievement first before, like, it depends on what sort of society you live in and come from. This is a very, like, Western society kind of, heteronormative way to look at how to live your life. I would argue that physiological needs and safety needs are kind of always at the bottom, no matter where you live, but it gets very kind of fuzzy when you get up here. I mean, there are certainly societies where, achievement, approval, recognition, prestige, status are much, much, much more important than love and belongingness. Another problem about this is that it's not as, the way that they have illustrated it here is very clear cut. You achieve this and then you can move on to this. Well, it's not quite so clear, right? Because, sometimes you are safe and you have the emotional space to kind of work on, good intimate relationships and social groups and all of that stuff. And sometimes you're not, and you don't have the space for that. That doesn't mean that those things don't still exist for you, that they're not still out there for you to tap into. It's just like a little bit less at some points than others. So, you can kind of like bounce between these, kind of depending on what's going on in your life and what's happening. I have never met anybody in my entire life who just sort of like, okay, now I'm, fed and housed and I'm safe, and like now I can work on my love and belongingness, and then I can work on my achievement. Like, that's just not really how it works. Like, what if you get sick? What if you develop COVID-19 or something, and then suddenly you have all of these things, but you can't focus on them because you need to focus on your physiological needs. So, there's some holes here, but it's a useful model in a lot of ways. All right. So this is slide 12. And the thing that I want to talk about on this slide is actually about cognitive dissonance theory. So I am recording this in the month before the election in 2020. And cognitive dissonance theory basically says that people are motivated to hold consistent beliefs and to justify their behaviors. A lot of people, do this way past the point where it makes sense, right? So if you think about how entrenched people get in their political beliefs, and what they will do to justify maintaining their beliefs, no matter what evidence that there is on the other side that maybe they should adjust their beliefs. That this is a very interesting theory to apply to, you know, just how stratified our society is politically at this moment, and how stratified it's been in, like, you know, the last 10, 15 years. You can justify your behavior almost any way using cognitive dissonance. So, you know, this is really worth thinking about, and we're gonna talk about this a little bit and probably have an assignment on it as we get a little closer to the election. Okay. Oops. All right, so just a little plug here. I just want to point out that there's a lot more to this than one slide in your PowerPoint and a few pages in your book. I actually teach an entire class on gender and the psychology of gender. Other people teach it as well. And if you are interested in gender, I highly recommend that you look for PSYC 25. Okay, so I skipped most of the slides where, you know, they do the true or false thing, but this one I feel like is kind of news you can use here. People talk about how money can't buy you happiness, but that's actually not true. There is a point where having more money is diminishing returns. So, you know, the difference in happiness between having $10 million in the bank and $20 million in the bank is not useful. But there's a big difference between having $10 in the bank and having $1 million in the bank, right? So, you know, if we go back a little bit, if we go back to this, you know, if you have $10 in the bank, you are probably going to be stuck down here somewhere, right? Because if you have $10, you might be hungry, you might be thirsty, you might not have a house, like that sort of situation, right? If you don't have a house, you're stuck here. It's money can buy you happiness in narrow ways when you look at it this way, right? Like, you need money to meet some of these needs. Can it buy you love? No. So that's what that trope is about, but it absolutely does impact your happiness. Okay, go back again. All right. So I also, in the interest of, you know, eliminating false assumptions, this hypothesis is really about facial expressions, and we are kind of entrenched in the idea that it doesn't matter what your face is doing. You feel how you feel. It doesn't actually impact your facial expression, doesn't impact your internal state. Turns out that that's not true. Your facial expression absolutely impacts your internal state. You can change your internal state to a certain degree, right? Like if you are, you know, in the middle of a crisis because, you know, you've lost somebody that's important to you, being, you know, looking in the mirror and smiling is not going to help that situation very much. But, you know, if you are just not in the greatest of places, and then you actually go and you do some smiling in the mirror, that actually does work, turns out. Okay, so that is all I have for you in this mini lecture today. As always, feel free to ask me any questions about the rest of it. I'm happy to explain, do another video, write a post, whatever is useful to you. All right, thank you so much. Bye-bye.